in the quiet suburban town of Warrington, a tragedy unfolded that would shock the nation and spark an intense conversation about culture, honor, and violence. Shafilea Ahmed was a bright and ambitious 17-year-old who dreamed of becoming a solicitor. But her life was tragically cut short in what would later be described as an honor killing. Her story began as one of conflict, caught between the expectations of her conservative British Pakistani family and her desire to embrace the freedoms of a Western lifestyle. For years, Shafilea endured relentless control and abuse, all while trying to navigate her dual identity. Her refusal to conform to her parents' strict values created a rift that grew wider with each passing day. The tension at home escalated when her parents attempted to force her into a marriage she did not want, prompting Shafilea to take drastic measures to resist their plans. Her eventual disappearance in September 2003 sparked a nationwide search, and for months, hope lingered that she might be found alive. But when her body was discovered by a riverbank in February 2004, hidden in bin bags and badly decomposed, the case took a grim turn. What followed was a lengthy investigation marked by frustration, secrecy, and a lack of direct evidence. For nearly a decade, the truth about Shafilea's death remained shrouded in silence, with her parents maintaining their innocence and no clear path to justice in sight. But in 2010, a shocking revelation from within the family would finally crack the case open, exposing a dark and disturbing reality. What led to Shafilea's tragic end? Who was responsible for silencing her dreams, and how did justice ultimately prevail? This documentary delves into the harrowing details of Shafilea Ahmed's life and death, piecing together the events that led to one of the most notorious murder trials in recent British history. As we uncover the twists and turns of this heartbreaking case, one question remains: could her fate have been prevented? Welcome to the Crime Series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you're watching from. Shafilea Ahmed was born on July 14, 1986, in Bradford, West Yorkshire, into a family that carried deep-rooted cultural values from rural Pakistan. Her father, Iftikhar Ahmed, had migrated to the UK as a child and worked as a taxi driver, while her mother, Farzana Ahmed, was a housewife. The Ahmed family adhered strictly to traditional customs, and this upbringing greatly influenced Shafilea's early years. From a young age, Shafilea exhibited qualities of a bright and ambitious child. She excelled academically and had aspirations of becoming a solicitor. Her teachers described her as a dedicated student who was well liked by her peers. However, life at home was starkly different from the encouraging environment she found at school. Shafilea's parents enforced stringent rules, particularly regarding her behavior and interactions with others, especially boys. This cultural dichotomy placed Shafilea in a difficult position as she attempted to navigate the conflicting worlds of home and school. At school, she was an ordinary British teenager with dreams, ambitions, and friends. However, at home, her parents exerted strict control over her actions, monitoring her movements and restricting her interactions with anyone they deemed inappropriate. Friends later recalled that Shafilea often seemed conflicted and withdrawn, particularly as tensions at home grew more severe. The few times she expressed herself freely, such as by wearing clothes her parents disapproved of, would result in punishment. On one occasion, after dyeing her hair and applying false nails, her mother reportedly reacted by forcibly washing out the dye and ripping off the false nails, while verbally abusing her. The Ahmed family's concerns about maintaining their honor within their community added another layer of pressure. Perhaps Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed were deeply worried about how they were perceived by other families within the close-knit Pakistani community in Warrington. Any deviation from traditional norms by Shafilea was viewed as a potential source of shame. Despite the constant surveillance and punishment, Shafilea continued to seek small ways to assert her independence. She secretly maintained friendships and confided in close friends about the challenges she faced at home. Some of her friends recalled how she would sometimes ask for help in small ways, such as staying over at a friend's house to avoid confrontations at home. The cultural divide between Shafilea and her parents widened as she grew older. While her parents clung to the traditions of their homeland, Shafilea embraced the British way of life, eager to integrate fully into the society she was born into. This clash of values set the stage for the tragic events that would later unfold. The cultural clash became particularly intense when discussions about Shafilea's marriage began. Her parents intended to arrange her marriage to a cousin in Pakistan, a practice that was common in their community, but one that Shafilea vehemently opposed. The idea of being forced into a marriage with someone she did not know or love filled her with dread. She openly expressed her refusal, which only worsened the relationship with her parents. In early 2003, Shafilea's parents took her on a trip to Pakistan, ostensibly to visit relatives and reconnect with their cultural roots. However, Shafilea soon discovered the real purpose of the trip. Her parents intended to arrange her marriage to a much older cousin. The thought of being forced into a life she did not want, with a man she barely knew, was overwhelming. Desperate to escape what she perceived as a prison sentence, Shafilea took a drastic step. She drank bleach. Whether it was a cry for help or a suicide attempt, the act was a clear indication of her despair. The bleach caused severe internal injuries, particularly to her esophagus, making it difficult for her to eat or drink. Her parents claimed that she had accidentally ingested the bleach, mistaking it for mouthwash during a power outage. This explanation was met with skepticism by friends, teachers, and later by authorities. To those who knew her, it was evident that Shafilea's actions were a desperate plea to avoid the forced marriage and to escape the suffocating control of her parents. Upon returning to the UK, Shafilea was admitted to a hospital for several weeks to treat the damage caused by the bleach. She lost a significant amount of weight and became physically weak. Despite her frail condition, her parents continued to exert control over her life, closely monitoring her interactions and movements. Medical staff at the hospital grew concerned about Shafilea's well-being. One nurse recalled how Shafilea confided in her about the pressure she faced at home. She spoke of her fear of being sent back to Pakistan and being forced into marriage. Despite these concerns, there was little that the medical staff could do beyond offering emotional support. Friends and teachers noticed a marked change in Shafilea upon her return to school. She appeared more withdrawn and anxious, as if carrying a heavy burden. Some friends later recalled how she spoke about the incident in Pakistan, expressing a mixture of fear and resignation about her future. Life at home became even more oppressive for Shafilea. She was forbidden from socializing with friends or participating in activities that her parents deemed inappropriate. Any attempt to assert her independence was met with harsh punishment, both verbal and physical. On occasions when Shafilea attempted to confide in others about her situation, she did so cautiously, fearing retribution if her parents found out. Teachers and social workers began noticing signs of ongoing abuse. Bruises on her arms and face, combined with her increasingly withdrawn demeanor, raised alarms. Concerned teachers reported these signs to social services, but despite a brief involvement, no substantial action was taken. Shafilea, likely afraid of worsening her circumstances, downplayed the severity of her situation during interviews with social workers. Consequently, the case was closed, and she was left to fend for herself in an increasingly hostile environment. Meanwhile, Shafilea continued attending school and working part-time at a call center, striving to maintain some semblance of normalcy. In February 2003, Shafilea reached a breaking point. With her situation at home becoming unbearable, she took a bold step. She ran away from her family's house. This was not the first time she had attempted to escape, but it was one of her most significant efforts to seek help and regain control over her life. Shafilea sought assistance from social services, presenting herself as homeless. During her stay in temporary accommodation, she confided in a social worker about the physical and emotional abuse she had endured at the hands of her parents. She expressed deep fears of being sent back to Pakistan, where she believed she would be forced into an unwanted marriage. Her account of life at home painted a harrowing picture, a household ruled by fear, where even minor acts of self-expression were met with harsh punishment. She described how her parents monitored her every move and how any deviation from their strict expectations resulted in severe repercussions. Despite her detailed plea for help, Shafilia's attempts to break free from her family's control were met with indifference by the authorities. Although social services temporarily housed her in a hotel, they ultimately failed to provide her with a long-term solution. Faced with the lack of viable alternatives and mounting pressure from her parents, who vehemently denied her allegations and portrayed themselves as victims of prejudice, Shafilia reluctantly returned home. The return to her family marked a turning point in Shafilia's life. Her parents, angered by her defiance, tightened their grip on her even further.
As we go into the most intense part of this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me motivation to create more videos.
In the months leading up to her death, Shafilia Ahmed's life became increasingly unbearable as the tension within the Ahmed household reached its peak. The once vibrant and ambitious teenager had become a shadow of her former self, worn down by the escalating abuse, constant surveillance, and her parents' unyielding attempts to control every aspect of her life. Her dreams of becoming a solicitor and living a life of independence faded as she found herself trapped in a cycle of fear and hopelessness. Her part-time job at a call center, which had once offered a brief respite from her oppressive home life, became another source of contention. Her parents disapproved of her working, seeing it as a step toward independence that threatened their control. On several occasions, they confronted her about her attire and interactions with colleagues, accusing her of bringing dishonor to the family. The ongoing pressure to conform to their expectations and the threat of being sent back to Pakistan loomed large over Shafilia. Despite her deteriorating health from the bleach incident earlier that year, her parents continued to make plans for her marriage to a cousin in Pakistan. The final confrontation occurred on the night of September 11, 2003. The argument began over Shafilia's choice of clothing, a frequent source of conflict in the family. Her parents accused her of being disobedient and dishonorable, and the argument quickly escalated into violence. Alesha described the horrifying scene in chilling detail during the later trial. She recounted how her parents forced Shafilia onto the sofa, and as she struggled and pleaded for her life, they suffocated her by placing a plastic bag in her mouth. The other children, including Alesha, were present during the murder, paralyzed by fear and unable to intervene. After Shafilia stopped struggling, Alesha recalled how her father carried her lifeless body out of the house, wrapped in bin bags. Her mother, meanwhile, cleaned the area and prepared sheets to aid in concealing the crime. The children were warned to remain silent and were told to say that Shafilia had run away if anyone asked about her. The next day, Shafilia's parents continued with their lives as though nothing had happened. They showed no outward signs of grief or concern, maintaining the facade of a normal family. When questioned by teachers and police about Shafilia's absence, they insisted that she had run away, a story they had used on previous occasions when she had fled the household to escape their abuse. For several months, the mystery of Shafilia's disappearance persisted. Her friends and teachers grew increasingly concerned as time passed without any sign of her. Despite the Ahmed's attempts to conceal the truth, rumors began to circulate within the community about the possibility of foul play. Shafilia's younger siblings, burdened by the secret of what had happened, lived in constant fear of their parents and the consequences of speaking out. On a cold February morning in 2004, 6 months after Shafilia Ahmed's disappearance, a gruesome discovery was made on the banks of the River Kent in Sedgwick, Cumbria, more than 70 miles from her family home in Warrington. Workmen stumbled upon skeletal remains partially concealed by debris, wrapped in black bin bags. The chilling find immediately prompted a call to the local police, who quickly cordoned off the area and began their investigation. Shafilia's body was so badly decomposed that it was initially difficult for pathologists to identify the remains or determine the exact cause of death. However, dental records eventually confirmed what many had feared. It was the body of the missing 17-year-old girl. Alongside the remains, personal items were found, including jewelry that was later identified by her parents as belonging to Shafilia. Among these items were a gold zigzag bracelet and a blue topaz ring that friends and family recognized from photographs. The advanced state of decomposition complicated the pathologist's work. Dr. Allison Armour, a home office pathologist who examined the remains, ruled out natural causes, and speculated that the most likely cause of death was suffocation or strangulation, based on the circumstances and evidence provided by the police. Despite the lack of clear physical trauma on the remains, the fact that Shafilia's body had been deliberately concealed pointed to foul play. The remote location where the body was discovered suggested careful planning on the part of the perpetrator or perpetrators. The area was known for its seclusion, and the presence of her body there indicated an attempt to hide the crime rather than simply discard the evidence. Dog walkers who frequented the area recalled a foul odor lingering around the site for weeks before the discovery, but they had assumed it was from a decaying animal. The discovery of Shafilia's body was a turning point in the case. Until that moment, her disappearance had officially been treated as a missing persons inquiry, albeit one that had raised suspicions among those familiar with her family situation. The discovery transformed it into a murder investigation, putting renewed pressure on the police to uncover the truth behind Shafilia's tragic fate. News of the discovery spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. Shafilia's friends, who had long feared the worst, were devastated by the confirmation of her death. Her teachers, who had reported their concerns about her well-being before her disappearance, expressed a sense of frustration and sorrow over the loss of a promising young life. Many questioned how such a tragedy could have occurred despite the warning signs and previous involvement of social services. The media played a significant role in amplifying public outrage. Coverage of Shafilia's case highlighted the cultural tensions she had faced and drew attention to the broader issue of honor-based violence in immigrant communities. Activists and advocacy groups called for stronger measures to protect young women at risk of forced marriage and domestic violence, urging authorities to learn from the failures that had allowed Shafilia's situation to escalate to such a tragic end. While the public mourned Shafilia's death and demanded justice, investigators faced a challenging task. The lack of direct evidence linking anyone to the crime, combined with the advanced decomposition of the body, meant that building a case would require a combination of witness testimonies, circumstantial evidence, and careful forensic analysis. Despite the growing suspicion around the parents, building a case against them was far from straightforward. The lack of forensic evidence meant that detectives needed to rely on witness statements and background information. Police re-interviewed Shafilia's friends, teachers, extended family, and social workers who had interacted with her in the months leading up to her disappearance. Each testimony painted a picture of a young woman living in fear, trapped between her desire for independence and her parents' rigid expectations. One crucial lead came from a senior homelessness officer who had previously worked with Shafilia during her brief escape from home in early 2003. The officer recalled how Shafilia had confided in her about the abuse she endured and her fear of being taken to Pakistan to be married against her will. This testimony added weight to the theory that Shafilia's murder was the result of a so-called honor killing, a term used to describe crimes committed to protect or restore the perceived honor of a family. As part of their strategy, investigators placed a covert listening device in the Ahmed family home. Over several weeks, they recorded conversations that provided crucial insights into the family dynamics and, more importantly, potential motives. In one particularly damning recording, Iftikhar Ahmed was heard discussing how, without proof, they can't do anything. This statement indicated a level of confidence that in the absence of direct evidence, the authorities would struggle to bring charges against them. While the recordings provided valuable context, they were not enough to secure a conviction. Detectives knew they needed more direct evidence or a key witness who could testify about the events leading up to Shafilia's death. They continued their efforts to gather information from the local community, issuing public appeals and encouraging anyone with knowledge of the case to come forward. Meanwhile, forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the Ahmed's home and vehicles, hoping to uncover any trace evidence that might link them to the crime. Although no definitive forensic link was established, the investigation revealed inconsistencies in the parents' accounts of Shafilea's disappearance. Their repeated insistence that Shafilea had simply run away began to unravel under scrutiny. In parallel, media coverage of the case intensified. The press highlighted the cultural pressures faced by Shafilea and the broader issue of honor-based violence within certain communities. Advocacy groups used the case to call for greater awareness and legal protections for young women at risk of forced marriage and domestic violence. The heightened public attention added pressure on the police to solve the case and bring those responsible to justice. Despite the obstacles, investigators remained resolute. They knew that solving Shafilea's murder was not just about finding her killer. It was about seeking justice for a young woman who had been silenced by a system that failed to protect her. Each new piece of information, however small, brought them closer to the truth. After years of painstaking investigation and little progress, a breakthrough in the Shafilea Ahmed case finally arrived in 2010, 7 years after her tragic death. This critical development came not from new forensic evidence, but from an unexpected source within the family itself, Shafilea's younger sister, Alesha Ahmed. Alesha had grown up in the same oppressive household as Shafilea, witnessing firsthand the abuse and strict control exerted by their parents. For years, she had remained silent, too fearful of the consequences to come forward. However, a dramatic turn of events led her to break her silence and reveal the truth about what had happened on that fateful night in September 2003. The catalyst for Alesha's decision was an armed robbery that she orchestrated at her family's home in 2010. At the time, she was struggling with personal issues and had become estranged from her parents. The robbery, which involved accomplices, quickly attracted police attention. During questioning, Alesha unexpectedly confessed that she had information about her sister's murder. Her revelation stunned investigators, who had long suspected that the key to solving the case lay within the Ahmed family. Alesha provided a chilling and detailed account of the night Shafilea was killed. She described how an argument had erupted over Shafilea's clothing and behavior, recurring points of tension in the household. According to Alesha, their parents, Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed, became enraged and decided to take matters into their own hands. Alesha recalled how her parents forced Shafilea onto the sofa and placed a plastic bag in her mouth while holding her down. Shafilea struggled desperately, but eventually, she stopped moving. Her death, Alesha said, occurred in front of the other children, who were too terrified to intervene. Alesha's testimony was the breakthrough the police had been waiting for. It provided crucial first-hand evidence that directly implicated Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed in their daughter's murder. Armed with this new information, investigators intensified their efforts to build a case that could stand up in court. They re-examined earlier evidence, including the covert recordings made in the Ahmed home, and conducted further interviews with family members and associates. The impact of Alesha's testimony was profound. For years, the Ahmeds had maintained that Shafilea had simply run away, a narrative that had allowed them to evade justice. Alesha's account shattered that illusion, exposing the dark reality of life within the Ahmed household. Her courage in coming forward, despite the potential repercussions, was widely praised by advocates and law enforcement alike. However, securing a conviction would still be a challenging task. The defense would undoubtedly attempt to discredit Alesha's testimony, arguing that her estrangement from her parents and involvement in the robbery made her an unreliable witness. To strengthen their case, prosecutors needed to corroborate her account with additional evidence and testimonies. The prosecution team, led by experienced barristers, carefully prepared their case. They understood that Alesha's testimony would be central to securing a conviction, but they also knew they needed to present a broader narrative that highlighted the cultural pressures and abusive environment Shafilea had endured. Their goal was to show that her murder was the tragic culmination of years of escalating tension and control. By late 2011, the police felt they had enough evidence to proceed. In September of that year, Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed were arrested and charged with the murder of their daughter. The arrests marked a significant moment in the case, bringing renewed hope to those who had long sought justice for Shafilea. The breakthrough in the investigation was a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the bravery of Alicia Ahmed. Without her decision to come forward, it is likely that Shafilea's murder would have remained unsolved, and her parents would have continued to evade justice. Alicia's testimony not only provided the crucial evidence needed to bring charges, but also shone a light on the hidden issue of honor-based violence, sparking renewed public discourse on the subject. In May 2012, after nearly 9 years of speculation, investigation, and mounting public pressure, the trial of Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed began at Chester Crown Court. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and concerned citizens, all eager to witness the culmination of a case that had captivated the nation and sparked intense debate about cultural pressures and honor-based violence. The prosecution, led by Henry Riding, presented a harrowing case that depicted Shafilea as a victim of relentless control, abuse, and ultimately murder. They argued that her parents killed her to protect their family's honor, which they believed had been tarnished by Shafilea's refusal to conform to their traditional values. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Shafilea's younger sister, Alicia Ahmed, who had bravely come forward 2 years earlier with her eyewitness account of the murder. The defense, however, sought to discredit Alicia, painting her as an unreliable witness with a motive for revenge against her parents. They pointed to her involvement in the robbery she had orchestrated at the family home in 2010 and suggested that her testimony was an attempt to gain leniency for her own criminal actions. The defense also emphasized the lack of direct forensic evidence linking the parents to the crime, arguing that the case was built on circumstantial evidence and hearsay. Despite these efforts, the prosecution methodically dismantled the defense's arguments. They presented a pattern of abusive behavior by the Ahmeds, corroborated by testimonies from Shafilea's friends, teachers, and social workers. Several witnesses recounted instances where Shafilea had confided in them about the physical and emotional abuse she endured at home. One friend recalled how Shafilea once showed her faded bruises on her neck and arms, while a teacher testified about Shafilea's fear of being taken to Pakistan and forced into marriage. Throughout the trial, the Ahmeds maintained their innocence. Iftikhar and Farzana both took the stand, denying any involvement in their daughter's death. Farzana, in a surprising twist, changed her version of events midway through the trial. Initially, she had claimed no knowledge of the murder, but later she accused her husband of acting alone in a moment of uncontrollable rage. This change in testimony was seen by many as a desperate attempt to shift blame and sow doubt among the jurors. Justice Roderick Evans, who presided over the trial, reminded the jury to focus on the evidence and the credibility of the witnesses. He emphasized that while cultural context could provide insight into the family's dynamics, it could not excuse or justify the taking of a life. After more than 2 months of emotional testimony and intense legal arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. On August 3, 2012, the jury returned with their verdict. Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed were found guilty of murdering their daughter, Shafilea Ahmed. The conviction of Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed marked the end of a long and arduous journey toward justice. While nothing could undo the tragedy of Shafilea's death, the trial ensured that her story would not be forgotten. It served as a powerful reminder of the need to protect vulnerable individuals and to stand against practices that perpetuate violence in the name of honor. As the Ahmeds were led away to begin their life sentences, those who had fought for Shafilea's justice vowed to continue their work, advocating for victims of honor-based violence and ensuring that her legacy would inspire change.
Loved what you saw? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to join our growing community. Your support keeps us creating.